At his peak, Adriano looked unstoppable, powerful, explosive, terrifying. For a few years, football believed it was watching the next great Brazilian superstar. Then slowly, football watched him disappear. Known around the world as the Emperor, Adriano became one of the most feared strikers of the 2000s. Not because of tricks, not because of flair, but because every time he struck the ball, it looked violent. Goalkeepers feared him, defenders backed away from him, and supporters believed almost anything was possible when Adriano charged toward goal. Born in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, in 1982, Adriano grew up surrounded by poverty and hardship. Football became escape, hope, opportunity, and from an early age, his talent looked frightening. Tall, powerful, left-footed. He looked built to dominate football physically. But behind the strength was a quiet personality. A young man deeply connected to family and home. After rising through Clube de Regatas do Flamengo, Adriano moved to Italy while still a teenager. Eventually, he arrived at Inter Milan. And that is where the Emperor was born. Italian football during the early 2000s was filled with legendary defenders. Yet Adriano bullied them. He scored with thunderous long shots, explosive runs, and shooting from impossible angles with brutal power. At times, he looked less like a footballer, and more like a force of nature. Former teammate Zlatan Ibrahimovic once admitted Adriano had abilities few players in history possessed. Because physically, he seemed unstoppable. At Inter, Adriano became one of world football's biggest stars. The San Siro roared every time he touched the ball. Supporters believed they were watching football's next dominant striker. For Brazil, he looked equally unstoppable. Alongside players like Ronaldinho, Kaká, and Ronaldo, Brazil possessed terrifying attacking talent. And Adriano often stood at the center of it. At the 2004 Copa América, Adriano became the tournament's top scorer and helped Brazil win the competition dramatically. Then came the goal against Argentina. Deep into stoppage time. Power, chaos, emotion. Moments like that made supporters believe Adriano could become football's next global superstar. But behind the goals, something darker had already begun. In 2004, Adriano received devastating news. His father had died suddenly, and according to many close to him, Adriano never truly recovered emotionally. The smile faded. The energy changed. Football no longer looked joyful. Former Inter president Massimo Moratti once admitted Adriano's decline felt deeply painful for everybody at the club. Because they loved him beyond football. Supporters could see the sadness growing. The absences increased. The performances changed. And slowly, football stopped seeing the Emperor. Instead, they saw a young man struggling emotionally in front of the world. That is what makes Adriano's story feel different from many football declines. It was not laziness. It was grief. And grief does not disappear because somebody is famous. Despite moments of brilliance returning occasionally, Adriano never truly looked the same again. The power remained, but the joy disappeared. Eventually, Adriano drifted away from Europe and returned to Brazil. And football supporters around the world watched sadly as one of the game's most terrifying talents slowly faded away. Yet even today, Adriano remains loved. Because supporters remember the feeling he created. The power, the excitement, the fear defenders felt. But they also remember the humanity, the vulnerability, the sadness behind the superstar. Some footballers are remembered because they fulfilled their destiny. Adriano is remembered because football never stopped wondering what might have been. Across his career, he won league titles, represented Brazil at the highest level, and became one of the most feared forwards of his generation. But more importantly, he reminded football supporters that even superheroes can break. That is why Adriano will always remain a true footballing icon. Not simply because of the goals, but because football never stopped missing the Emperor. What is your favorite memory of Adriano?